My name is Margaret Hale, and one quiet afternoon my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye in front of my son and granddaughter and accused me of stealing her jewelry. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the quietest revenge you've ever heard. It started in the kitchen the way all family chaos does. We were cutting fruit for Clara's birthday party. Soft music played in the background. My granddaughter was singing off-key, and the house smelled like vanilla and pine cleaner. And then, like a crack-splitting porcelain, she said it. "I can't find my grandmother's bracelet. It's been gone since last week. I hope no one took it." I looked up. The knife in my hand froze mid-slice. My son paused too, eyes flicking from her to me and back again. She added, "You were the only one who came by this week, Mom." The word mom sounded acidic, almost deliberate. I smiled faintly, not trusting my voice just yet. "I haven't seen any bracelet, dear." She shrugged, but it wasn't casual. It was icy. "Well, it's missing. And it's not like it grew legs." Silence wrapped around the room like thick fog. Clara's singing stopped. My son's shoulders stiffened. I could feel the narrative forming, not because of what she said, but because of what she wanted him to believe. And she was winning. Later that night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly above. My reflection looked tired, not just old, but worn. She planned that. I whispered it aloud, as if saying it would make it more real. I replayed the way she had looked at me, sharp, composed, almost rehearsed. I didn't cry. Instead, I reached for my old notebook and wrote down everything: her words, my son's reaction, the time, the date. It was the first entry in what would become my evidence journal. In the days that followed, everything changed in small surgical cuts. My texts to my son got shorter replies. When I asked to take Clara to the park, he said, "Maybe not this week." My daughter-in-law didn't speak directly to me anymore, only in clipped sentences passed through him. She had effectively moved me to the margins of my own family. But I didn't push back. Not yet. Because pushing makes people defensive, but silence makes them reveal themselves. And I had learned through years of being a teacher that people say the most when they think you're not listening. A week after the accusation, I visited for a family lunch. As I entered the foyer, I saw her glance down, a sharp flick of her eyes to the hallway table drawer. I smiled politely. Later, when she left the kitchen to take a phone call, I passed that same drawer. It was locked. I never remembered it being locked before. Something was off. Very off. Still, I said nothing. But when I got home, I opened a private folder on my old laptop. Journal of Events. Jewelry Accusation, I titled it. I began cataloging even the smallest details. Her tone. Who else was present? What pieces she claimed were missing? Dates and times. Because I knew what she was doing, or at least I was beginning to. She was isolating me, undermining me, eroding my place in the family with just enough subtlety that it looked like she was being reasonable. And if I reacted emotionally, she'd win. She could say I was dramatic, defensive, maybe even forgetful. I could already hear her framing the story. "She's just older now. You know how memory can be." So I played her game, but by my rules. One day, Clara snuck me a drawing she made. A little crayon portrait of the two of us holding hands under a tree, but in the corner she'd drawn a face crying. I asked her what it was. She whispered, "Mommy says you're not nice anymore." My throat tightened. I smiled anyway, kissed her head, told her I loved her. But my heart broke in 5 different directions. This wasn't just about a bracelet. She was rewriting my identity in my own granddaughter's eyes. And still I didn't fight back. Because the day would come when truth spoke louder than any story she could invent. I knew I'd never convince her I was innocent. But I didn't need her belief. What I needed was proof, not just for my name, but for my son, for Clara, and for me. Because when someone tells a lie, all you need is one crack in their version of the truth. And I was going to find it. The days that followed felt like watching my own life from behind glass. I became a guest in their presence. My daughter-in-law Liana barely looked at me. My son Matthew grew quieter around me, as if carrying a guilt he hadn't yet named. and sweet Clara, had started pausing before hugging me, as if checking whether it was still allowed. That hurt more than anything. But I didn't beg. I didn't defend myself again. Because I understood something Liana didn't silence is not weakness. It's surveillance. I began noticing patterns. Whenever Liana brought up the missing bracelet, usually at strategic moments like family dinners, or when Matthew and I were finally sharing a laugh, she'd look directly at me, her voice light but sharp. "I've turned the house upside down." "Still nothing. You haven't found it in your things, have you, Margaret?" Always with a smile, always with Matthew nearby. I'd calmly shake my head. "No, dear, I haven't." Then I'd glance at Matthew and see the confusion in his eyes. The need to believe both of us, and the strain of being forced to choose. It was working. Her manipulation was working. But she was getting too comfortable. And that was my first advantage. One Sunday morning, I called in a favor from an old friend, Janine, who now worked at a small pawn shop downtown. I told her I was looking for something sentimental. I wasn't specific. I didn't have to be. Janine always had a good memory. As she scrolled through the logs on her old screen, I described the bracelet gold with a small sapphire clasp engraved on the inside with an M, not for me, ironically, but for Liana's grandmother, Miriam. Janine paused. "Actually, something just came in 2 weeks ago that sounds exactly like that. Let me check the ID used." When she read the name aloud, my stomach turned. It was Liana's maiden name. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I simply closed my eyes and whispered, "There it is." Janine looked confused. I told her I didn't want to cause trouble, just needed to confirm. She agreed to keep it between us, and she printed me a copy of the transaction receipt. It was small, faint, just ink on paper. But to me it was weight, it was momentum. It was the first thread that would unravel her entire story. I didn't confront anyone, not yet. Instead, I went back home, pulled out my laptop, and scanned the receipt into my growing file titled L. Accusation Defense Evidence. I added a new note. Item appears pawned prior to public accusation. Name used Liana's maiden. Bracelet allegedly stolen, now verified sold by her. The facts were starting to stack. Still, I moved with caution. Because women like Liana don't collapse in one blow, they fray slowly. They fall apart when their mask begins to slip in front of the wrong person. And I was going to make sure that happened. That evening, I visited them under the guise of dropping off a casserole. Clara opened the door, eyes lighting up briefly. But Liana came into view behind her and froze. "Oh, Margaret, we weren't expecting you. Just wanted to bring dinner. Thought you might be busy." She looked at the dish, then at me. I noticed her right wrist was bare. The bracelet had been gone for weeks, according to her. But she'd worn it just days before her accusation. I had seen it with my own eyes. She forgot to pretend that night. And now it was gone from her wrist. She was getting careless. That same night, as they sat around the TV, I pretended to head home, but instead returned to my car and waited. I had placed a tiny audio recorder in the entryway earlier that day, tucked beneath a bowl of fake potpourri near the hall table. It wasn't high-tech, but it would catch something if they talked. The next day I retrieved it. And what I heard, it wasn't a confession. It wasn't incriminating on its own. But it was revealing. Liana's voice. She's getting suspicious. Matthew's suspicious of what Liana... Nothing. Just... She looks at me like she knows something. It's uncomfortable. Uncomfortable, that was good. Uncomfortable people make mistakes. 2 days later, she slipped. At another family lunch, she excused herself and went upstairs, said she needed a minute. I waited 5, then quietly followed. I found her in the guest room, the room I used to sleep in when I stayed over. The closet door was slightly ajar. Her back was to me. She was digging through my old overnight bag. When she turned and saw me in the doorway, her face went pale for a second. Then she laughed. "Oh, I was just... organizing. You left this here, didn't you?" I smiled. "Funny, I don't remember leaving anything." And I let the silence speak the rest. That night, I wrote a new journal entry. She searched my bag today. No shame, no hesitation. She thinks I'm weak enough to take the fall. I wasn't. This wasn't just about my name anymore. It was about Clara. It was about how easily one lie could change the way a child looked at someone they loved. I wasn't going to let my memory be rewritten in Clara's heart. Not by a thief. Not by someone who smiled when she lied. Some lies scream, others whisper. Liana's did neither. Hers settled in the silence between other people's words and corrupted everything they thought they understood. A few days after I caught her rummaging through my old bag, something strange happened. I was at home folding laundry in my quiet little kitchen when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. And there on my porch stood a neighbor, Mrs. Henley, from 2 blocks down, with a careful look in her eyes. She held out a small pouch. This was dropped in my mailbox by mistake. It has your name on it. It was soft velvet. When I opened it, my breath caught. Inside were earrings. My earrings. Gold teardrops shaped a gift from Matthew years ago. I hadn't even realized they were missing. But now I understood. Liana was escalating. Not only had she started making false accusations, she was quietly removing things from my home, my belongings. She wanted to make the story true. Because if I said she'd taken my jewelry and she could find it later in someone else's mailbox or even in my own house, I'd look paranoid, unstable. She wasn't just undermining me in front of my family. She was preparing to destroy my credibility completely. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in the dark, the earrings resting on the nightstand like evidence from a crime scene. She wasn't just playing games. She was setting traps. I made a decision. I had to protect myself. Not with confrontation, not yet. With proof, with preparation. With the kind of patience that people mistake for passivity. I spent the next week documenting everything meticulously. I photographed the earrings, the pouch, the timestamp on the neighbor's security camera, which she kindly let me access. I created folders, physical and digital, duplicated everything onto a flash drive, and stored one in my sewing box, another in the cookie jar no one ever opened, and one under the drawer lining in my vanity. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. The next time I visited my son's house, I was more alert than ever. Liana greeted me with her usual tight-lipped smile, voice dripping with performative warmth. "We just cleaned up, hope you don't mind things being out of place." I scanned the room. Nothing was out of place. But her wording was intentional. She was warning me, or taunting me. Later, while helping Clara with her homework in the living room, I noticed Liana peeking in from the kitchen, watching us. Not smiling. Just observing. Then she vanished. 10 minutes later, I saw her coming downstairs, tucking something into her purse quickly when she noticed me looking. That's when I knew. She wasn't just trying to manipulate the family narrative. She was trying to stage something. I made an excuse to leave early, and once I got home, I checked my phone's hidden voice recorder. I had left it tucked in my coat pocket on their entryway bench. It had captured this. "Matthew. She's barely staying long these days. Liana. She doesn't trust me. You don't see it. Matthew. She hasn't done anything. Liana. Not yet. But she's getting paranoid. I think she's hiding something." That sentence struck me like a cold slap. She was preparing the next chapter in her story, the paranoid old woman. And she wanted to write it before I exposed the truth. I needed more, something irrefutable, something even Matthew couldn't deny. I booked a quiet appointment with a jewelry appraiser downtown, someone discreet recommended by Janine. I brought in one of the pairs of earrings Liana wore often, ones she claimed had been stolen and replaced. The appraiser took one look and raised an eyebrow. "This isn't new. The clasp is vintage. This is 1960s work, maybe earlier." He cleaned it, held it under the magnifier. "See this tiny engraving, initials MH. My initials. Not hers. Mine." It was the moment everything snapped into place. She had stolen my earrings, accused me of stealing hers, and continued wearing mine like trophies, assuming I wouldn't recognize what I'd once owned. And maybe she was right. I wouldn't have, if I hadn't started paying attention. If I hadn't been willing to sit in my silence long enough for the truth to show its face. I left the appraiser's office with trembling hands, not from fear but from clarity. She wasn't smart. She was arrogant. And arrogance always forgets one thing: someone is always watching. I walked home slowly that day, Passing by a toy store, Clara loved a bakery Matthew and I used to visit before things got complicated. There was grief, yes, for the family I thought I had. But under the grief, there was something sharper. Resolve. It was time to gather everything. The receipt from the pawn shop, the audio of her subtle manipulation, the photo of my earrings, the appraiser's report, the incident logs, even Clara's drawing where I was crying in the corner. Each item a puzzle piece, each silence I had endured now evidence of patience, not weakness. And soon I would no longer be silent. I didn't walk into war. I let war come to me. Because when someone's building a lie, the most dangerous thing you can do is wait quietly for it to collapse. The next family dinner was Clara's school celebration. She'd gotten top marks on her science project, and Matthew wanted to host a little gathering. I baked a pie. The same one Clara loved, cinnamon-laced and flaky the way she remembered from when she was younger and the world felt simpler. I arrived a little early, partly to help, partly because I wanted to see how Liana would react when caught off guard. She opened the door. "Oh, Margaret, you're early." Smile too sharp, voice too high. "Just thought I'd give you a hand," I replied. "You always do so much." She blinked, caught off guard. Wasn't used to compliments from me anymore. But compliments in moments like this are disarming. Let her think the storm has passed. The dinner went smoothly on the surface. Clara chattered about her project. Matthew poured wine. Liana played the perfect hostess. But her eyes never left me, not for more than a moment. She was watching, calculating. She knew I knew something, but she didn't know what. And that terrified her. Later, as we cleared plates, I accidentally dropped a folded napkin under the table. As I bent to retrieve it, I noticed something odd beneath the bench near the window. Something was taped underneath. After everyone had gone to bed, I returned. Pretending to have left my glasses behind, I knocked and re-entered the house. Clara was already tucked in. Liana answered, lips tight, eyes wary. "I think I left my glasses," I said. She stepped aside, but didn't follow. She stayed by the door. I walked into the living room, bent under the bench, and peeled back the tape. It was a velvet pouch, the same kind used in the pawn shop, inside a bracelet. Not mine, not Clara's, but hers. The one she claimed I had stolen and never returned. I turned around slowly, pouch in hand. She was there now, standing just behind me. For the first time, she didn't pretend. Her voice dropped the sweetness. "You need to stop." "And what exactly is it I'm doing, Liana?" She stepped closer. The tension in her face was like cracked glass, brittle, close to breaking. "You think you're clever, but all you're doing is hurting this family. You're poisoning Matthew against me. And Clara deserves truth." "Truth?" She laughed coldly. "You're confused. You always have been." There it was. That final push, the attempt to reframe everything as delusion, as mine. But I didn't rise to it. I just held up the bracelet and asked calmly, "Why is this hidden under your bench?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence screamed. The next day I called Matthew, asked him to come to my house, just him. No pressure, just a conversation between mother and son. He agreed hesitantly. He arrived mid-afternoon, tired around the eyes, as if he'd been living in constant emotional fog. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one he built me with his hands when he was just 22. I laid everything out. The journal, the pawn receipt, the appraiser's note, the photographs, the pouch from under the bench, and finally the voice recordings. He didn't speak for a long time, just flipped slowly through the pages. Then he said, "How long have you been collecting all this?" "Since the day she accused me." His eyes filled, but he didn't cry. "Why didn't you say something?" "Because I needed you to see it on your own, without me shouting it at you." I thought. He rubbed his temples. "I thought you were slipping." I started doubting. "That's what she wanted." He nodded, still staring at the papers. Then softly, "She made me think my own mother was a thief." There was no satisfaction in his grief, no joy in watching him wrestle with what had happened. But there was a strange aching relief, because he finally knew. He confronted her that night. I didn't go with him, didn't ask how it went. But a week later, she moved out of the house. She didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a note. She just left. Matthew hasn't spoken much about it since. We've taken it slow, rebuilding things, spending quiet time with Clara again, baking pies, helping with homework. And Liana, she filed for divorce 2 months later. She blamed incompatibility on the paperwork, never admitted anything. But I didn't need her confession. Because truth doesn't always need a witness. Sometimes it just needs one person to stand silently and wait long enough for lies to rot from the inside out. The house felt colder after she left, not because of the weather, but because silence, once a tool I had wielded, now became the atmosphere around Matthew. He didn't speak much, didn't bring up the confrontation, and I didn't push. Sometimes the wound needs to breathe before it can close. Clara came over that weekend, just her. Matthew said Liana had other plans. The moment Clara saw me, her face lit up. The old Clara. The one who used to run into my arms and drag me into her make-believe worlds. She hugged me without hesitation, and I realized something. She'd known. On some level, she'd always known. Children don't always need words. They understand tone, tension, shifts in the air. And maybe my stillness had shown her something real, something her mother's performance never could. We baked cookies, danced in the living room, spilled flour on the floor. Clara laughed a deep belly laugh that hadn't been there in months. I felt a knot loosen in my chest. But just when I thought things might begin to settle, a new ripple formed. Matthew called me 2 days later. She went to the police. I froze. What? Liana. She reported the jewelry stolen. Again. She even listed the bracelet. I sank into the nearest chair. Even after everything. She says she has no idea how it ended up under the bench. Claims I planted it. That you manipulated me. There it was. She was trying one last time to flip the script. I didn't panic. I asked Matthew to text me the case number. Then I hung up and pulled out the folder again. Every piece of evidence, every note, timestamp, and receipt would be tested now. I wasn't afraid of that. I had built truth like a house, and Liana had built a tent out of shadows. A few days later, I received a call from a Detective Rios. She was professional, measured, but I could hear the curiosity in her tone. We'd just like to ask you a few questions about a theft report filed against you. I agreed to meet her the next day at the station. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. The police station was sterile, echoing slightly as I walked in with a copy of everything I'd saved, organized, dated, annotated. Detective Rios led me into a small room with a camera in the corner and offered me water. I declined. Then she asked her first question. Did you steal your daughter-in-law's jewelry? I looked her in the eye. No, but I believe she tried to make it look like I did. And then I told her everything. No embellishment, no rage, just facts, dates, patterns. I showed her the pawn receipt, the voice recordings, the appraiser's certificate with my initials etched into the gold. Her expression never changed, but I could see her posture shift. Not pity. Respect. When I finished, she asked one last thing. Why didn't you report this sooner? I smiled. Because sometimes if you wait long enough, the truth walks in on its own. 3 weeks passed before I heard anything. Then Matthew called, voice shaken but steady. They're not moving forward with her claim. Are they pressing charges? Not yet. But they found more pawnshop records under her maiden name. Other items. From other people. So it wasn't just me. She'd done this before, and maybe she'd do it again. But this time not quietly, not without consequence. I hung up and sat by my kitchen window watching the wind move the trees. There was no joy in her fall, only a quiet kind of justice. Because when you're falsely accused, when your name becomes a weapon in someone else's war, all you have left is your truth. And you can't throw that like a punch. You hold it until it burns through everything they built. The strange thing about survival is how unremarkable it looks from the outside. No parades, no applause. Just you breathing with your head held a little higher than before. After the detective dropped the case, things didn't go back to normal. Not really. Matthew still carried the shame of believing Liana. It hung on him like a second skin. He didn't say it aloud, but every silence, every hesitant glance was a quiet apology. I didn't need the words, but I needed him to understand something else. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. One Sunday over coffee at my place, I finally said it. You didn't fail me, Matthew. You just trusted the wrong person. He looked up, guilt plain in his eyes. But I didn't trust you. No, I nodded. You didn't. He flinched. But I understand why. She worked hard to twist everything. And you were tired. Overwhelmed. You wanted peace. I took a sip and added, that's what manipulative people count on good people being too tired to look deeper. He reached for my hand. I let him take it. I see it now, he whispered. Later that afternoon, Clara ran into the kitchen holding a drawing. Look, Grandma, it's us, and Daddy, and cookies. She'd drawn me with a huge smile, Matthew with chocolate on his face, and her in the middle with stars in her hair. No, Liana, no trace of tension, just love. I felt something loosen inside my chest again, something that had been clenched for months. But not everyone was ready to move on. Liana began sending emails to Matthew. At first they were polite. Let's talk about visitation. Clara misses me. Then they became sharp. Your mother poisoned you against me. You always choose her over me. She's not innocent. You'll regret listening to her. Matthew didn't respond. He forwarded them to his lawyer instead. But I could feel the tremor she left behind, like a spider's web still catching wind long after the spider is gone. It was in that space, that uncertain aftermath, that I decided to take back one last thing she tried to strip from me: my reputation. Not just within the family, but in the neighborhood, the church circle, the little grocery where I'd once caught people glancing sideways when I walked in. People talk, and lies spread. But truth takes its time. So I wrote a letter. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't dramatic. It was factual, calm, measured. I mailed it to a few close friends. Let them decide what to do with it. And slowly the looks shifted. A former friend stopped me at the market. Margaret, I'm so sorry. I believed what she said. I didn't know. I nodded. That's the thing with lies. They sound louder than truth at first. One afternoon, I was watering the plants outside when Mrs. Henley from down the street approached. She had a small smile and a box. Thought you might want this. Inside was a delicate music box, one that had gone missing months ago. One I hadn't even noticed was gone yet. It turned up in my backyard, she said. No clue how, but I knew. Liana had hidden it there. Planted it for a future discovery. Another proof of my supposed thievery. The depth of her games still stunned me. And yet I no longer felt angry. I felt resolved. Later, I returned to the church. I hadn't been in weeks. My favorite seat by the stained glass window was still there. A few heads turned when I entered, some with hesitation, others with a flicker of recognition. But I didn't shrink, because shame doesn't belong to the falsely accused. It belongs to those who craft falsehoods, and to those who stay silent once they know the truth. After service, as people lingered in the garden, a woman I hadn't spoken to in months approached me. Margaret, I heard everything. From Matthew. From Janine, too. I'm so sorry. She looked like she wanted me to rage, to cry, to confess how angry I still was. But I didn't. I just said, sometimes the loudest revenge is living a quiet, honest life. She blinked, then smiled. That sounds like you. That night, Clara stayed over. She curled up beside me in bed like she used to when she was little. In the dark, she whispered, Mom said mean things about you, but I didn't believe all of them. Why not? I asked softly. Because when I'm with you, I feel good. And when someone makes me feel scared or confused, I don't think they're telling the truth. Out of the mouths of children. I kissed her forehead and stared at the ceiling, a strange mix of peace and ache in my chest. I had survived the fire, but more importantly, I had kept my soul intact. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't begged. I had simply waited. And truth, as always, had come home. Grief doesn't only come from death. Sometimes it comes from knowing someone you trusted never truly saw you as a person. That kind of grief stays quiet. It doesn't scream its size. It had been nearly 2 months since Liana left, and the days had taken on a rhythm again. Clara visited more frequently now, sometimes staying the weekend. Matthew was healing in his own way, quieter, more thoughtful, sometimes lost in the middle of a sentence. He never spoke her name anymore, but I knew she still haunted him, not as a lover, as a failure. One afternoon while Clara played in the yard, Matthew and I shared coffee on the porch. He glanced toward the fence where Liana once stood snapping photos of Clara as if parenting were a performance. "Do you think she ever loved me?" he asked suddenly. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was complicated. I think she loved how you made her feel, how you looked beside her. But love that's built on appearances can't survive reality. He nodded slowly. "She told me once that you were jealous of her." I smiled, not from humor but from sadness. "She told you that because she was afraid of being exposed. People like that project what they fear the most. She said I needed to grow up and cut the cord with you." That one stung more than I expected. But I just said, "Maybe you did need to grow up." But not like that. It took him a long time to say it, but he did. "I'm sorry, Mom." And for the first time in years, I saw the boy I once raised, the one who used to leave handwritten notes on my pillow. I reached over, squeezed his hand. "I know, and I never stopped loving you." That night, I cleaned out the last drawer in the guest room. Inside, folded beneath an old quilt, was a picture of our family from before Liana entered our lives. We were standing in the backyard, me, Matthew, Clara as a baby, and Liana holding a glass of wine, looking off camera. Even then, she didn't quite fit. Not because she wasn't welcome, but because she never wanted to fit. She wanted control. Later that week, I got a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a small envelope with a single charm bracelet and a note in Liana's handwriting. "I suppose this belongs to you." No apology, no explanation. Just a quiet admission. She knew the game was over. I placed the bracelet in a small box with the rest of the returned items, not because I needed them back, but because they were proof. Not just of the theft, of the deception, the manipulation, the entitlement. People like Liana don't believe they're doing harm, they believe they're owed whatever they can take without being caught. And when you finally catch them, they slink away. Never sorry, only exposed. I started writing again. Not novels or anything fancy. Just journaling. For Clara, mostly a record of our family. A record of what strength really looks like. I didn't write about Liana by name, only as the shadow that taught us how light survives. One Saturday, I picked Clara up from school. She got in the car, unusually quiet. "Mom says she wants to see me again," she said softly. I took a breath. "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know. Sometimes she makes me feel small, but I miss her hugs." I didn't flinch, because Clara's honesty was a gift. It's okay to love someone and still feel unsure. Do I have to choose? Not right now, but one day you'll have to choose who makes you feel safe. She nodded, staring out the window. I knew Liana would come back around eventually. Not to apologize, but to reclaim control, image, reputation. She'd paint herself as the misunderstood mother, the woman scorned, the real victim. But I'd be ready, not with bitterness, with clarity, and a truth no one could take from me anymore. When I tucked Clara in that night, she whispered, "Will you always believe me, Grandma?" I kissed her cheek. Always. Even if the world doesn't, because that is where it starts stopping the cycle. Teaching the next generation that silence doesn't have to be surrender. Sometimes it's the most dangerous strength of all. Truth doesn't end stories, it reshapes them. And once you speak it, no one, no matter how manipulative, can put it back in the box. 3 months after Liana left, Clara's school held a family day. Matthew had to work unexpectedly, and Clara asked me if I could go. Her eyes lit up when I said yes. "Do I still call you Grandma in front of everyone?" "Of course, darling. That's exactly who I am." She hugged me tight, and I felt her small arms squeeze out a weight I hadn't realized I still carried. At the event, we did crafts, planted little bean sprouts in plastic cups, and ate cupcakes. The teacher pulled me aside afterward. "Clara talks about you constantly. You're her safe place." Safe. That word held so much power now, because I knew what it felt like to be made to feel dangerous, as if my presence could hurt my own family. Liana had done that, but Clara saw through it all. The next week, it began again. A text from Matthew. "Liana's filed for shared custody. She's hired a new lawyer." Of course she had. She'd stayed quiet long enough to appear stable. She was positioning herself for the comeback. And not for Clara's sake. For her image. I didn't give advice, I didn't interfere. But I documented everything I could. Again. This time not for me, for Clara. Her drawings, Her words, the way she asked to stay longer at my house, the way she pulled away when her mother's name came up. It was all evidence not for court necessarily, but for the truth Clara would one day piece together. Children grow up, they connect dots. And when that day came, I wanted her to have her own story, not the one Liana would try to rewrite. Liana did call once. She got my number through Matthew's phone, I assume. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "I think we got off on the wrong foot, Margaret." I said nothing. "We both love Clara. We both want what's best. Surely we can put the past behind us." Still, I said nothing. Because some people use conversation like a scalpel slicing carefully to find your weakness. And silence, as always, remained my strongest defense. She finally said, "If you keep poisoning Clara against me, I won't stay quiet." Then she hung up. There it was. The real her. Still beneath the surface, still dangerous, only now, more desperate. Matthew considered mediation, but Clara's voice mattered too. So he took her to a child therapist's neutral ground. Clara was open, honest, hesitant but brave. Sometimes I feel like my mom makes things up. Like stories that aren't true. And then she makes me say, "I saw them too." It shattered him. Because now it wasn't just about what Liana did to me, it was about what she might do to Clara. After the session, Matthew drove straight to my house. He didn't say much, just sat in the living room with his head in his hands. Then he looked up and said, "She can't be alone with Clara anymore." It was the hardest decision he'd ever made, and the most necessary. He filed for primary custody. Liana erupted, of course. Emails, accusations, social media posts painting herself as the martyr. She even accused me again, this time of manipulation, of turning her daughter against her. But she didn't have evidence. Because lies don't leave trails that hold up. Only truth does. Clara stayed with me more frequently now. She started keeping a small box of her favorite things in the guest room: books, drawings, a flashlight shaped like a dolphin. One night while brushing her hair, she asked, "Will she ever say sorry?" I paused. She might not. Some people never do. Not because they don't know they were wrong, but because they can't live with the feeling of being less than perfect. That's sad. It is. She looked at me in the mirror. But I don't want to be like that. I smiled. You won't. You already know how to tell the truth even when it's hard. That moment stayed with me. Because Liana's power had never been about her lies. It was about our silence in the face of them. But now, there was a child in the world who would not be silent, who would grow up knowing the value of quiet courage and hard truth. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest revenge of all. I always believe that if someone tells a lie long enough, eventually even they start to believe it. But there comes a moment when illusion collides with reality, and only one survives. It was the custody hearing that brought us all face to face again. The courtroom was cold, all sharp lines and whispers. Liana wore a tailored navy dress and an expression that could have passed for humble if you didn't know her. She sat straight backed at the table with her lawyer, a man who looked polished but restless. She whispered in his ear constantly, as if feeding a script. Across from her, Matthew looked pale. Not because he didn't believe in his case, but because no child wants to publicly dissect the woman they once called home. And I was there too. Not to speak, not yet, but to stand as witness. Clara sat with a court-appointed child advocate. She didn't testify, thank God. No child should carry that weight. But her sessions with the therapist and advocate were entered into record. One phrase stood out. "When I'm with Mommy, I feel like I have to pretend to be happy." The courtroom fell silent when it was read. Even Liana flinched. Her lawyer countered quickly, painting me as the manipulative mother-in-law, a woman desperate to control her son and jealous of the daughter-in-law who replaced her. I could feel eyes on me. I didn't blink. Because when you know who you are, you don't need to argue for it. But then came the turning point. Matthews submitted the audio file, the one I'd nearly deleted in my weakest moment. The one of Liana rifling through my drawers, whispering to herself. Her voice was clear. "Let's see what you're hiding, you old witch." Gasps echoed. Her lawyer tried to object, claiming the audio was obtained unethically, but the judge allowed it to stand as rebuttal character evidence. Liana turned to Matthew, eyes wide, lips parted like she couldn't breathe. Because the game was up. It was a strange feeling watching her crumble, not instantly, but piece by piece. She stopped whispering to her lawyer. Her hands trembled. And for the first time since all this began, I saw something real in her expression. Fear. Not of me, of losing control. The judge didn't make a final ruling that day. Family court moves slower than grief. But Matthew walked out with temporary full custody. Clara would stay with him, and by extension with me, until the next review. Liana didn't speak to me as she left the courtroom. But her lawyer did. He paused beside me, adjusted his glasses, and said, "She never told us about the pawn records." I didn't answer, because what was there to say? That night Matthew cried. Not loud sobs. Just a quiet, steady release. He sat on the edge of my sofa, head in hands, whispering over and over, "I let her do this to you, to Clara, to all of us." And I said, "The only thing I could—" "You loved someone who made it easy to look away. That's not weakness, it's being human." He looked up, tears streaking his cheeks. "You never looked away." I couldn't afford to. Clara joined us on the sofa later, falling asleep with her head in his lap and her feet in mine. 3 generations, one long heavy silence. But this time it wasn't a silence of fear. It was recovery. The next morning I found something on my doorstep. A small velvet pouch. Inside the gold bracelet. The real one. No note, no signature. Just the final piece of the puzzle returned in cowardice. I placed it in the drawer where it had once lived. Not as treasure, as closure. I started baking again. Not for comfort, for joy. Clara loved helping, covered in flour and licking spoons when she thought I wasn't looking. We made a batch of lemon squares and delivered them to the church office, the postman, the lady who walks her dog past my house every evening. Small acts of normalcy. Each one felt like reclaiming a thread that Liana had once tried to unravel. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had something better. Peace. Earned, not gifted. And when you get it after surviving lies that tried to erase you, that peace tastes like freedom. People think truth always wins in the end. But the truth is, it only wins when someone is brave enough to carry it all the way through. The court hearing had ended, but the ripples were far from over. Liana's social media went dark. Friends she once boasted about vanished one by one. Even her parents, who used to exchange holiday cards with me, quietly stepped back, unsure what to believe. That's the thing about people who thrive on image. When it crumbles, so does their network. But I didn't rejoice in her unraveling. I just observed it quietly. Like watching fog finally lift from a field you'd always known was beautiful underneath. Matthew came over one afternoon, a stack of papers in hand. "I've started drafting a new will," he said, "and power of attorney, and guardianship plans for Clara just in case." I looked up, surprised. "All of this already?" He nodded. "I want it all clear. No more confusion. No more room for someone like her to twist anything." He placed the folder on the kitchen table. "And I want to include you, legally, permanently." It wasn't about money, or land, or control. It was about trust, the very thing Liana tried to poison. And now here it was returned to me in black ink and quiet intention. Later that night, Clara asked me a question I wasn't ready for. "Grandma, was Mommy always like that? Or did something make her mean?" I took a long breath. Children ask questions hoping for simple answers. But sometimes they need more than that. "I think your mommy's heart got a little sick, Clara. Not like a cold, but in the way she sees love. She thinks love is about control, not kindness. Will she get better?" "I hope so. Do you still love her?" Silence. Then, "I love who I hoped she could be." It wasn't the answer of a saint, but it was the truth. We were invited to a family wedding a few weeks later. Matthew's cousin, the entire extended family, would be there. I hesitated. Would people whisper? Would they bring up what happened? But Clara tugged at my arm and said, "Wear your blue dress. You look strong in it." So I did. At the reception, someone I hadn't seen in years pulled me aside. "Margaret, I just want to say I always thought something was off. I just didn't know how to say it." "You didn't have to," I said. "It's enough that you see it now." She reached for my hand and squeezed. "You made it through. Most people wouldn't." I looked across the room at Clara, dancing in circles, her laughter spilling like music. I had to, for her. As I sipped punch from a plastic cup, I realized something. Liana had tried to turn me into the villain of her story. And for a while she succeeded. But I had rewritten it. Not by fighting her with fire, by standing in the storm and refusing to be moved. Back home, I finally pulled out an old notebook I hadn't touched in years. I began writing again. Not for publication, for Clara. A collection of letters, memories, moments of truth. Everything I wanted her to know as she grew older. Not just about what happened, about how to survive it. About what to do when someone calls you a liar to your face. When they twist your kindness into threat. When they try to erase your name from the family you built with your own hands. You write it down. You speak when it counts. You carry your dignity like armor soft on the inside, steel on the outside. And one day when the world asks her, "Where did you learn to be so strong?" she'll say, "From my grandmother." And I'll smile from wherever I am, knowing the silence I once held wasn't weakness. It was the birthplace of something indestructible. We always think survival is the end of the story, but survival is only the middle. The end is what we build from it. The first spring after Liana left was the brightest in years. Clara and I planted new lavender along the walkway. She insisted on naming each bush after a cartoon character. We had a row of Elsa bugs, Dora and Moana, growing happily in the sun. Matthew smiled more now, still quieter than before, but present, fully present. He cooked Sunday dinners again, asked questions about Clara's school, watched movies with us even if they were animated. And I knew this version of him, this slower, steadier man, was the one Liana never made space for. One afternoon, I found a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single page written in shaky cursive. "I know you'll never forgive me, but I had to say I'm sorry. Not for you, for Clara. I hope one day she understands I was broken, and I broke others to feel whole." No name, but I knew who it was. Liana hadn't written me for sympathy. She'd written because silence had turned inward on her. And without someone to blame, she was finally forced to face her own reflection. I didn't show Clara the letter. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because forgiveness isn't something you push onto a child like a weight. It's something she'll grow into or not on her own time. What mattered now was what surrounded her. Stability, love, truth. That weekend, Clara brought home a school assignment family tree. She sat at the kitchen table, markers and glue sticks everywhere. "Grandma, can I put you next to Dad? I want to show that you're part of my main family." My throat caught. "Of course, sweetheart. Should I put Mommy on there?" I paused. "If you want to." She thought for a long time, then nodded. "I'll put her on the side branch." She drew a little heart next to Liana's name, then a bigger one next to mine. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't bitterness. It was a child's way of saying, "I know what I feel, and I'm not afraid to show it." That night, as I watched her sleep, I realized everything Liana had tried to do, isolate me, discredit me, steal my peace, had only revealed one thing. She underestimated the strength of quiet women. We don't scream. We outlast. I sat on the porch with a blanket over my lap and a notebook in hand. I wrote a single line. "I was once accused of stealing what was mine. But what they didn't know is no one can steal back what was never lost." Because even when my name was dragged through whispers and filings and false tears, I knew who I was. I was Clara's safe place, Matthew's home base, my own beginning and ending. People think revenge looks like fire and fury, but sometimes it looks like lavender blooming in sunlight. It looks like a child drawing hearts next to your name. It looks like your story being told finally in your own words. And that's the kind of truth no lie can touch. It's strange what you remember most when the dust finally settles. Not the fights, not the court hearings, but the quiet mornings, the ones that feel like healing. The smell of toast. The light in Clara's room as it hit the yellow curtains I sewed when she was 2. The way Matthew's footsteps on the stairs no longer made me tense. There were no more late-night arguments, no slammed doors, just peace. Earned peace. But even in peace, the past doesn't disappear. It lingers not like a ghost, but like a scar. Visible, permanent, but no longer painful. One morning, Clara came to the table holding an envelope she'd found in her backpack. This was in my cubby at school. My heart tightened as I took it from her. No return address. just her name written in delicate, familiar handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph of Clara and Liana at the zoo, a day I remembered well. I had taken that photo. The second item in the envelope was a note. I miss you every day. You'll always be my daughter. Love, Mommy. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't manipulative, at least not overtly. But it was still intrusion. Because Liana had been told not to contact Clara outside legal channels, this was a violation. I folded the note and placed it in the kitchen drawer, the one where I kept documentation of everything related to her. Clara watched me carefully. Am I in trouble? Of course not, sweetheart. Is she allowed to send me stuff? Not like this. But you didn't do anything wrong. She nodded, then returned to her cereal more thoughtful than usual. That night, Matthew and I sat on the porch after Clara went to bed. I handed him the letter. His jaw tightened. She'll never stop, will she? She'll stop when she runs out of angles. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. I don't know how I was so blind. You weren't blind. You were hopeful. And hope, real hope, can make you ignore a lot of warning signs. He nodded slowly, staring out at the darkened yard. She doesn't want Clara back. She wants control. Exactly. The next day, Matthew contacted his lawyer. A motion was filed to formally restrict all non-court-approved contact. It was granted in less than a week. Liana didn't contest it. But I knew that silence was temporary. With her, everything always was. In the meantime, Clara had started therapy again. Not because anything was wrong. Because we wanted everything to stay right. She worked with a woman named Janice. Warm eyes, calm voice, the kind of presence that felt like a weighted blanket. One afternoon, Janice invited me in for a joint session. Clara sat between us, clutching a small stuffed owl. Janice asked Clara if she had any questions for me, anything she was curious about but hadn't asked yet. Clara turned to me, small fingers twisting in the owl's wings. Why didn't you yell when Mommy said you stole her things? I blinked. It wasn't the question I expected, but it was exactly the right one. Because yelling doesn't fix lies, sweetheart. It just makes people stop listening. I needed people to see what was true, not be scared by how loud I was. Clara nodded thoughtfully. So you stayed quiet to be strong? Yes, but also to stay safe, and to make sure the truth had room to speak for itself. Janice smiled gently at that. Clara smiled too. That night, I journaled again. I wrote about legacy, about how trauma doesn't have to be passed down, not if you interrupt it, not if you speak gently when others scream, not if you teach the next generation that dignity is not silence, it's choosing when to speak. The days stretched into summer. Clara's final report card came home, all A's and a note from her teacher. Clara is thoughtful, kind, and wise beyond her years. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I smiled at that. Not because I needed validation, but because it meant the damage Liana tried to cause hadn't won. Clara was still whole, still growing, still herself. One Sunday afternoon, we had a family picnic at the park. Just me, Matthew, Clara, and Matthew's friend Jenna, a woman he'd met at work. They weren't dating yet, but I saw the way he looked at her. Tentative, open, curious. Not desperate, not blinded by charm like before. Jenna helped Clara fly a kite. Matthew grilled hot dogs. I sat on the blanket and watched, not with suspicion, but with cautious hope. Because for the first time in a long time, I saw a future that didn't require healing. A future that was just life. After we packed up, Clara fell asleep in the back seat of Matthew's car. He turned to me. Thank you. For what? For not giving up. On me. On her. On all of this. I reached over and touched his shoulder. That's what family is, Matthew. It's not perfect, but it's permanent. He smiled, and it wasn't sad this time. It was full. Later that night, after Clara was tucked in and Matthew had gone home, I sat at my window and looked up at the stars. And I realized I had once been afraid of becoming invisible in my own story. But now I knew better, because I had written it. And every page, every chapter, every scar was mine. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It's what grows when you stop feeding it. It had been nearly a year since Liana last made contact. We'd adjusted. Clara had grown more confident. Her once hesitant laughter now came freely like music returning to a home where it had long been muted. Matthew had started seeing Jenna. Not officially, but she was around more, helping with school projects, joining dinners, even attending Clara's soccer games. Jenna never tried to replace anyone. She simply showed up gently, respectfully, like someone who understood that stepping into broken places requires softness, not ego. I watched the way Clara held Jenna's hand without being asked. That said everything. One Wednesday afternoon, Clara came home with a flyer in her backpack. "Grandma, we have Grandparents' Day next month. You have to come." Her eyes sparkled. "I want everyone to meet you." It wasn't just excitement, it was pride. And I realized we had done it. We had rewritten the narrative Liana tried to impose. We had turned shame into strength. And I had become something more than a grandmother. I had become proof that quiet love outlasts loud cruelty. The next week, I got an unexpected message on Facebook from Liana. "I know you don't owe me anything, but I'd like to speak. One time. In person. No tricks." I stared at the message for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I just felt still. I waited 2 days before replying. "Public place. 1 hour. No lawyers. No Clara." She agreed. We met at a small cafe near the courthouse. She arrived first. Dressed in muted tones, minimal makeup, hair pulled back. No jewelry. When she saw me, she stood out of habit, maybe then sat again quickly. "Thank you for coming." I nodded but said nothing. She stirred her tea 3 times before speaking. "I've started therapy." I remained silent. It's not an excuse, just a starting point. She looked older than I remembered. Not in years, but in weight. "I think part of me always hated that Clara loved you so much." She looked up sharply. "You were always calm. I felt like I had to perform just to keep up, to matter." Still, I said nothing. "I ruined everything." I exhaled slowly. "Yes, you did." Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't reach across the table. I didn't comfort. That wasn't mine to give anymore. "Do you want me gone forever?" she asked. "That's not up to me," I replied. "That's up to Clara. When she's older, if she wants to speak with you, she will. But until then, you stay back." She nodded, resigned. "Will you tell her I'm sorry?" I considered that. If the time is ever right and she asks, maybe. That was the only gift I could offer. Honesty without cruelty, boundaries without bitterness. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt no rage, no relief, just release. She had finally said the words not to fix anything but to face it. And I had answered not as her enemy but as Clara's protector. That night, I didn't tell Clara about the meeting. Some truths are still seeds. They need time, soil, and space before they bloom. Instead, I tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You are loved beyond what you'll ever understand." She smiled in her sleep, and that was enough. They say time heals all wounds, but it's not time that heals, it's what you do with it. Grandparents' Day arrived on a soft golden morning in early May. Clara was up early, her dress already laid out the night before. She came downstairs with her hair half-brushed, holding a flower crown made of fake daisies. "Can you help me fix this, Grandma? I want it to look perfect." I knelt in front of her and adjusted the crown. "You already do." She beamed. Not because I said the words, but because she believed them. And that, more than anything, was the victory I hadn't known I needed. At the school, the auditorium buzzed with cheerful chaos. Grandparents milled about, clutching coffee cups, greeting each other with that soft, shared pride unique to the older generation. I sat beside Clara as her class performed a small musical number about family trees. And there she stood, my granddaughter, proudly pointing to a drawing where she had placed me at the roots. Not an extra branch, not an afterthought, the root. My throat tightened. I wasn't just part of her family. I was her foundation. Afterward, the students brought their grandparents to their classroom. We were instructed to sit together and write letters to each other. Clara handed me a glittery pen and a folded paper with 2 hearts drawn in the corners. She wrote slowly, tongue poking out the side of her mouth in concentration. When she finished, she slid the letter over to me, cheeks pink. I unfolded it. "Dear Grandma, I love you because you're brave. You helped me feel safe. You don't yell, but you still make people listen. I want to be like you when I grow up. My vision blurred. I took her hand and whispered, "You already are." Later that week, Matthew came by with a small package. "Jenna and I got you something," he said. "A thank you, but also a beginning." I opened the box slowly. Inside was a locket antique gold with a small photo of Clara on one side and a quote engraved on the other. "Truth is quiet but never invisible." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Because there are moments in life that deserve silence not from fear, but from reverence. Jenna stepped forward, her tone gentle. "I know I can never replace what was broken, but I hope I can be part of what's being rebuilt." I looked at her long and steady, and then I smiled. "You already are?" That night, as I prepared for bed, I passed the hallway mirror and caught my own reflection. Not the tired eyes of a woman who had been falsely accused, not the hunched shoulders of someone erased by lies, but a woman who stood firm, who waited without striking, who rebuilt without permission. The kind of woman who doesn't just survive, she changes the course of what comes next. I climbed into bed, the locket resting just beneath my collarbone, warm from my skin. And I whispered, maybe to the past, maybe to no one at all, "You underestimated the wrong woman." And then I turned off the light. My name is Margaret Hale, and I was once accused of theft by my own daughter-in-law. She looked me in the eyes and told my son, told the police that I had taken things that weren't mine. But the real theft, it wasn't the earrings or the money she claimed I took. It was the attempt to rob me of my place in my family, my name, my worth. I could have screamed. I could have fought dirty. I could have taken the bait, reacted in fury, played the game by her rules. But I didn't. Instead, I chose silence. Not because I was weak, but because I knew the truth. And the truth, when protected by patience, has a power louder than any lie. That choice to wait, to document, to let her spin her own web changed everything. Because eventually the lies tangled. Her story fell apart in public. And all the while I stood still, whole. And when the dust finally settled, my son looked at me with eyes wide open for the first time in years. "I should have believed you," he told me. And I said nothing, because forgiveness isn't always made of words. It's made of staying. And I stayed. Now, over a year later, the garden is blooming. The house feels warm again, not just in temperature, but in soul. Clara is growing taller by the week, and she no longer flinches at the word family. She says it like it means something again. We've rebuilt. Not quickly, not easily, but brick by honest brick. And I am proud not just of the outcome, but of the way I earned it. Matthew and Jenna are engaged now. He didn't rush into it. This time he studied everything: her kindness, her boundaries, her love for Clara. He came to me a week before proposing. "I want your blessing, Mom. Not just because you're my mother, but because you're the one who taught me what love really looks like." I gave it freely. Not because Jenna is perfect, but because she is real. Because she doesn't try to compete or control. She simply exists alongside us gently, like someone who has nothing to prove, and that more than anything made me trust her. A few days after the engagement, I received something in the mail. No return address. It was Liana's handwriting. I opened it slowly, careful not to let Clara see. Inside was a brief letter. "I know I can never undo what I did. I just hope one day Clara will know how much I loved her, even when I didn't know how to show it. I'm in therapy. I'm not asking for anything. Just hoping you're all okay." I read it twice, then folded it back up and placed it in the drawer with all the others. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear. Just a small passing ache, the kind that lingers after a wound has fully closed. I didn't tell Clara. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because some truths are like seeds. They need time and light and readiness before they can take root. And right now she was growing without that shadow. She was joyful, safe, free. And I wouldn't disturb that for the sake of closure that no one had asked for. A few weeks later, Clara had a school event, Grandparents' Day. She'd talked about it for weeks. "You have to come, Grandma," she told me. "I want everyone to meet you." She wore a soft blue dress and carried a hand-painted card that said, "My grandma is the strongest person I know." She stood on that stage, sang with her classmates, then pointed at me proudly from the crowd. And in that moment, everything I'd endured, the humiliation, the accusations, the lonely nights, melted into something bigger. Legacy. Not of pain, but of resilience. After the performance, we were invited into the classroom to draw family trees. Clara's tree was colorful, messy, covered in glitter. She placed me at the roots. Then she paused. "Should I put Mommy?" I didn't answer right away. "You can if you want to, sweetheart." She nodded and added a smaller branch. Next to it, she wrote just one word, "Mom." But next to my name, she drew a heart. Then another. "This one's for always," she whispered. And I knew I didn't need to be the only name. I just needed to be the one she trusted. Later that evening, Clara sat with me as I prepared dinner. "Grandma," she said, "why didn't you yell at Mommy when she lied?" I set the spoon down gently. "Because yelling doesn't change people's minds. It only makes them stop listening." She tilted her head. "So you were quiet on purpose." I was quiet because I wanted the truth to speak louder than the noise. She nodded slowly. "I think it did." Before bed, she handed me a drawing, a lavender bush with a quote written in her best handwriting. "Truth is quiet, but never invisible." I smiled. Because she understood. Not just the events, but the meaning behind them. Now each day feels lighter. I still keep records, not out of fear, but as a reminder. Not of what happened, but of what I overcame. I journal almost every morning. Sometimes it's a memory. Sometimes just a quote I want Clara to find one day. Yesterday, I wrote, "I was once accused of theft." But what they didn't know was I was never trying to take anything. I was trying to keep what had already been mine, my truth, my voice, my place. If you've listened this far, if you've ever been accused, silenced, or betrayed by someone you let into your life, I want you to know something. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to prove yourself to everyone. You don't have to win in public to know you've already won. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the power. Because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits. And when it speaks, it's undeniable. Thank you for watching this story on Grace's Truth. If this moved you, please like, subscribe, and share your own story in the comments below. Let someone else know they're not alone, and that quiet strength is still strength.